People need to learn this stuff, because if they don't understand, they will be destroyed. When you listen to the mainstream media, this is essentially what you're looking at. You are looking at nothing. You are just looking at a cave. But when you don't listen to the mainstream media, suddenly your eyes are open and you can see a lot more. Instead of just looking at the wall in that cave, which isn't going to do you any good, you're able to see everything as it is. And you know what? I wanted to talk about in this video something that people probably won't be interested in, and it's the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That's what it's called. Why do I call it the CPI? And I wanted to explain that, and a lot of you have asked for me to explain it in a video. And you know, it's a complicated explanation because it has a lot of different things attached to it. But let's just talk about the CPI to begin with, because that's the easiest thing to explain. Basically, back in the 1980s, you had a CPI, a Consumer Price Index, that was much more accurate. Why was it much more accurate? Because they didn't change what was in the basket constantly. So they didn't constantly pull things out of the CPI and put new things in. If you're measuring a basket of goods which is constantly changing, is that going to be accurate? No. And that's exactly what we do today. That's exactly what the mainstream media assumes is real. And I don't assume it's real. That's the thing. So you hear like inflation is coming down, which is true. You'll hear that it's at 4%, it might be at 5%. Who really gives a shit? Because it is completely wrong. You're measuring a basket of goods which is constantly changing. At the end of 2021, they announced and said, you know what, we're gonna add used vehicle prices to the CPI. Okay, great. What had been happening with used vehicle prices for the past couple of years? You and I know that. They've been spiking. Essentially, they hadn't captured any of the gains in used vehicle prices, but they wanted to capture the decline, and that is why they put it in there. So then that makes the CPI totally fake, totally useless, in my opinion. You just really have to think about it logically. If somebody is measuring a basket of goods and they're constantly changing what they put in that basket, it's not going to be accurate historically. It will measure inflation to a certain extent. It's going to measure the ups and downs to a certain extent. Depending on the way they're manipulating that, it can massively understate inflation. And boy, has that happened. People are being absolutely destroyed. They are being slaughtered. People are like pigs being led to slaughter and they don't even know it. And that is what I'm trying to do on this channel, is to wake people up and say, hey, do you know the government is destroying you? It doesn't matter whether you own an asset and are participating in the debt Ponzi or you're not. If you're earning Canadian dollars or US dollars, the government has destroyed you over the past 2 years. And I don't see anybody out on the streets protesting about it. And this is why I plan to boycott the country. You know what? It's kind of funny because the country I'm in right now, Panama, they did have a massive protest last year. They blocked the streets, it created chaos, and it was because the cost of living had gone up so much. People were getting pissed off and angry, and they went to the streets and they blocked everything off and they demanded something, and then the government fixed the gas prices. So now Panama has the lowest gas prices in the world. Now, I'm not here to debate whether that policy is good or not. I don't think it's a good policy at all. At least the people here are willing to stand up to it. Whereas people in Canada, people in the United States even, they're not doing anything about it. They don't realize. I created a chart which shows what has happened in real wage growth, and that thing should be going viral. Millions of people should be watching this video and saying, what the hell is going on? What the fuck is going on? But the reality is barely anybody will probably watch this video. I know how well these videos do, and they don't do well, but I'm not here trying to make a video just because it will do well. I'm here trying to make a video because it's the ultimate truth of what's happening, and people are being destroyed. The government decided that we're going to spend loads of money, and whether you agree with that or not, they took the tax money and did that. Now, the problem to begin with, in my opinion, is that they have that authority and they're able to do that, and the taxes are so high that governments like the US government, they impact the entire world, global economy. So, you know, when the government of the United States comes out and says, we're going to spend a ton of money, that impacts the whole world, and we feel it in inflation. And the same happens and other countries follow. That's what happens in the West. Countries follow the United States. So that's what we saw. And you know what? It's frustrating because you have to understand that part of what's going on to understand the CPI and why the CPI is so manipulated, because now it makes sense, doesn't it? If they want to understate inflation, they're going to manipulate that CPI and they're going to tell you, you know what, real wage growth, it's actually slightly positive. And the Bank of Canada, who knows whether they actually believe it or don't. Remember, they don't create the inflation numbers. The government creates the inflation numbers, but the actions that come on the back of those inflation numbers are from the Bank of Canada. So the Bank of Canada might say inflation is at 2%. The reality is it's at 4%. Nobody's going to argue with that because people are busy. They don't have time. They don't want to look into the economy. They don't want to learn macro, but they need to. People need to learn this stuff because if they don't understand, they will be destroyed. Their quality of life is going down. You and I know that the quality of life in places like Canada is going down. You know, the healthcare is shit. So many things are really, really bad and they're just getting worse. They're not getting better. I tried to see the doctor because I was cutting down a tree. It fell on my head. I cut my head. We didn't know whether it was bad because when you cut your head, you bleed a lot. So we went to the urgent care. We were stood in line for an hour. Nothing was happening. We hadn't even been triaged. It didn't feel like anybody cared. And I would have paid if I could to see a doctor. I would have paid. When you need care, you need care. You don't want to go to a hospital and ambulance and then sit in the ambulance and die. That's legitimately happening in Canada. And it's not just happening in Canada, it's happening in the UK also. You see, my mindset isn't just what's happening here in Canada. Well, not here in Canada, I'm in Panama right now. It's what's happening in other Western countries because I see it, because most of my family lives in the UK and they're being destroyed as well. So it's not just Canada, it's also the United States, just to a lesser extent, because they have a slight advantage over everybody else in terms of the Western countries because they have the global reserve currency. And really, you just have to realize that this CPI, it's a complete facade. Like, people have been destroyed. Their wages have fell 12%. And that is probably a modest estimate. 12% in 2022. People lost in purchasing power. So how does this even happen? Because when you look over the past decade, it has been very high. In fact, when you look back to the 1990s, it has been very high. People have been being destroyed. There's only been a couple of times where real wage growth, if you're measuring it against the 1980 CPI, has actually gone slightly positive. In 2009, after a massive stimulus program and deficit spending from the government, and in 2020, after the same thing. And it has not nearly took into account all the amount that has been lost over years. You are talking a decline in wealth, a decline in living standards of probably more than 50%. Civil unrest is rising. People are getting pissed off. There seems to be more protests, more strikes you're seeing because people are pissed off. They know, they feel what's going on and they're trying to get more money. They're trying to make things better, but nothing's working because the government is ultimately the puppeteer. It's pulling all the strings of what people are thinking and what's going on, especially in places like Canada, where the mainstream media, like I said at the start of this video, is essentially the one that controls the narrative, which is a dangerous, dangerous thing. And even politicians that have come up and said, you know what, we're going to get rid of that, we're going to shrink the government, like Pierre, well, guess what? I don't hear him talk about shrinking the government much anymore since he became leader of the Conservatives, progressive Conservatives as well. And you know what? The government isn't going to be able to fix this mess. The mess has been going on for far too long, and people might say that's negative, but I don't think it's negative in my opinion. I think it's positive because you have to do what's right for your family and position yourself in a way where you can move to another country or you can do whatever you can to be the most successful in that country, to survive, to better yourself and your family, because that's all you can do. We live in a world where everybody is being turned on one another, where we have this woke agenda that is being pushed, which is just totally wrong. It doesn't matter which Western country you're in, you see it. And when you come to countries like Panama, which are like going back in time, places like Mexico, it's like a breath of fresh air. People aren't on their phones constantly, they don't seem as brainwashed, they're more open, people engage in conversation. television. It's just all about the phone and what is on the phone. The mainstream media. It's unhealthy. It's a real unhealthy lifestyle. And the thing is, the government authoritarianism, especially in places like Canada, it's just beginning, in my opinion. Because the amount of debt that people have is at insane levels. So the government has the ultimate control over the people now because they are in so much debt. They're in a vulnerable position, and the government can just print money via deficit spending, because that is really money printing. You think it's QE, that's what the mainstream media has led you to believe, but really it's deficit spending and credit creation, which has been full-blown massive over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, because of the lending standards being so low in places like Canada. I mean, come and ask for a loan at a bank here in Panama, and banks here in Panama are very stable. They don't want to lend to you, or if they do, it's at a very high rate and you're going to have to put a lot of money down. And that's the difference between a manipulative facade created by the government, things like the CMHC, which are supposedly doing you good, are actually destroying you, and people don't even realize it. And the thing is, I've realized, unfortunately, as I think many people should, the only way you get past this, have a better life and better yourself, is to boycott the countries to leave. You might not agree with that. You might want to stay and try and convince as many people as possible. That's what I try and do on this channel, of what's going on. But the reality is, it's a sad, sad situation. It's kind of crazy, guys, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Show your support in the comments and we will talk down there. If you've enjoyed this video, you may like this video here. You might also like that video there. I would love it if you could join my email list. Link is in the description. Watch out for the scammers in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye, guys.